How's everybody doing? We are really glad that you're here with us. All right, quick question as we get started. How many of you have been on Splash Mountain? Okay. How many of you enjoyed Splash Mountain? All right, pray for these people. They enjoy torture. My mom has this picture of my wife and I from when we were pretty early in our marriage and riding Splash Mountain. Now, two things you need to know about my wife and I. One, my wife loves roller coasters. There's the fear of impending death. She just can't get enough of it. And the second thing is I hate roller coasters, and I just don't understand people that like the feeling of falling to their doom. And I don't get it. I feel like people they need like counseling, shock therapy, or something. I can't figure it out. But anyway, back to the picture. So you know how when you're going over I know it's closed now, but they had like the big waterfall, and then they would take a picture of you. So that's the picture that she has. And so my wife said to me, she said, oh, when we go on it, we should ride in the front row because it's more fun. And I question that, and I'm like, all right. And she's like, oh, where would you rather sit? I'm like, look, I want to sit in the gift shop. But apparently, that's not an option, so I'm going to just try to be a good sport. So anyway, we get on the ride, and, there's like 3 drops in that ride. And the second one I always thought was the worst because that's the one that's in the dark. Anyway, we get to the big thing, and the picture tells the whole story. We get to, the thing is going down, and then this is my wife in the picture. Time of her life. Here's me in the picture. And I'm holding on to that bar as if that's the only thing keeping me alive. And by the way, there's no logic to that. And I don't know if there's ever been a story like, yeah, man, I went down. I'm glad I was holding on to that bar. That's why I'm here to tell the story, But anyway, the problem is, and this is just part of what it is to be human, is that when things are totally out of control, we want to find something to control. And we do this. We can find ourselves in whatever situation. Everything is a total chaos. But if we can find one thing, this is the bar that I'm going to grab hold of, then it gives us this feeling like at least something is in control. And the problem is, and this is the real challenge, is that, and this space kind of varies, but there is reality. And then there's our ability to control things. What we want is for these two things to be together. We control all of reality, and then, everything's good. But the problem is the bigger the space between reality and our ability to control, it creates, now the question is, what do we fill with the space in between? And so sometimes we fill it with worry, we fill it with anxiety, we fill it with questioning God's love for us. And yet, here's the thing, it's in that space where spiritual maturity is born. Because when we can recognize our inability to control all circumstances, and yet God's complete control of all situations, now, this is the hardest lesson to learn. And the challenge is, not only is it the hardest lesson to learn, it's a lesson that you don't learn once. We've got to kind of repeatedly learn this, but if we want to be spiritually mature, we've got not only to learn it, but we've got to live it. And so we have a choice as to what we're going to fill with the space in between control and reality. The happiest people that you know, the people that have the most joy, the people who are the wisest that you know, they fill the space. They don't fill it with worry, they don't fill it with anxiety. Instead, they fill it with trust. They fill it with trust because they have looked at the past in their life and they have seen how no matter the storm or difficulty, God has shown up time and time again. And if he's been so faithful to me in the past, then certainly he's going to be faithful to me in the future. And you know what the result of that is? The result is everything we're looking for. It's peace, it's joy, it's purpose, it's confidence that God is never going to leave me or forsake me. Now, we are in, if you can believe it, message number 36 in our series in the book of Acts. And if you're not aware, the book of Acts is the book in the New Testament that talks about the growth, development, and multiplication of the early church after the resurrection of Jesus. And the theme of the book is how the gospel begins in Jerusalem and then makes its way to the capital city of Rome in the heart of the Roman Empire. And we're almost there. We're going to finish the book next week. And if you've been following with us, then you know that the Apostle Paul has gone through this nightmare over the last couple of years of his life. He arrives in Jerusalem after his third missionary journey. He is almost immediately arrested in the temple. They start beating him in the temple. Roman authorities show up because they think that a riot is ensuing. They grab Paul, thinking he's the ringleader, bring him to the Antonia Fortress, which is the Roman barracks next to the temple. And that while there's some inquiries every time that they question Paul, a riot breaks out. He eventually gets sent to Caesarea, which is the Roman headquarters in the area. And it's just been inquiry after inquiry. And 2 years later, after not getting any justice, Paul does what was the right of every Roman citizen. He appeals to Caesar. Now, the story that we're going to look at in chapter 27 is Paul has appealed to Caesar. That's been granted. Now he's got to make his way from Caesarea all the way to Rome. And there's danger, there's ominous winds, and there's, a shipwreck. There's all kinds of fun stuff. And here's why this message is so important, not just historically, but it's so important applicationally for your life and in mine. Because we all go through storms. Because we all experience moments where the wind is contrary to us, where circumstances seem to be preventing us from doing and going where it is that we ultimately want to. And we've got to know how to handle the storms. We've got to know how to avoid the storms sometimes that happen and get to a place that God wants us to go. But there's another question that I want to answer in our time together. And I want to answer the question of why storms happen at all. You see, we're going to see how everyone's perception of Paul changes from the beginning of the voyage to the end. And so once again, sometimes you go through a storm and God is changing and transforming you. Sometimes you go through a storm and your perception of who God is changes over the course of time. But the other thing that sometimes we don't realize is that when you're going through a storm, people are watching. And people are watching and they're seeing how your trust and faith in God is now transforming them. And that's one of the things we're going to focus on in our time. So we're going to start in Acts chapter 27, and we're going to start in verse 1, and here's what we read. And when it was decided that we should sail to Italy, they delivered Paul and some of the prisoners to one named Julius, a centurion of the Augustan regiment. So entering a ship of Atramidium, we put to sea, meaning to sail along the coast of Asia. Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, was with us, and the next day we landed at Sidon. Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him liberty to go to his friends and receive care. And when we had put to sea from there, we sailed under the shelter of Cyprus because the winds were contrary. And when he had sailed over the sea, which is off Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing to Italy, and he put us on board. And when we had sailed slowly many days, we arrived with difficulty off Cydus. The wind was not permitting us to proceed. We sailed under the shelter of Crete off Salmon. Passing it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens near the city of Lasea. And after much time had been spent, and sailing was now dangerous because the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, "Men, I perceive that the voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only of the cargo and ship, but also of our lives." Nevertheless, the centurion was more persuaded by the helmsman and by the owner of the ship than by the things spoken by Paul. And because the harbor was not suitable to winter in, the majority advised to set sail from there also, if by any means they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete opening toward the southwest and northwest, and winter there. And if you pause there and give me your attention, three things we're going to look at when we talk about avoiding a shipwreck, avoiding storms. Number one is this, is that I need to heed the warnings. Heed the warnings. Now, there's a few things I want to tell you as we read this, and I know I'm reading, get to city, move on. It's like, okay, I'm going to take your word for it, but I have no idea where these places are. I'm going to show you the places in just a minute. But I wanted to give you a little bit of background so you know exactly what's going on. The first is, there's a guy named Julius. He is a centurion, and he is in charge of Paul. We read in the first couple of verses that he's part of what's called the Augustan regiment, or cohort. Now, the Roman military was set up, it was divided into 28 different legions. Every legion had 10 cohorts. Those cohorts had about 500 to 600 soldiers, and so every one of those cohorts had 6 centurions, so which is what Julius was part of. So A centurion was in charge of basically 100 soldiers, and so there was a few people there with him as well. So, Julius is basically in middle management in the Roman Empire. And so the second thing you need to know about this journey that they take is that there were no passenger ships in the ancient world. You picked up a cargo ship that was headed wherever it is that you were going. And that also means there were no amenities. This was not a Disney cruise. This wasn't Royal Caribbean. You had all your own supplies. So you had to bring your own stuff. Food, water, bedding, Dramamine, whatever you needed, you better bring it on your own. The third thing is that prisoners weren't allowed to take guests with them. And so the fact that Luke, who's writing, when he says we, that means Luke, and then Aristarchus is there with him, means a couple of things. And there's a few people that surmise that they could have said that they were Paul's slaves, because that was a thing in the Roman Empire. If you were a Roman citizen who had slaves, you could bring your slaves with you when you were going to trial. And you'll see that Paul says, Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner. That's a little light as far as, I think the more likely scenario is that every trial that Paul had, the person overseeing said that Paul was innocent. And so what is most likely took place is that Festus, who was the governor, gave Paul permission for his friends to go with him because he was a Roman citizen and because there were no formal charges against him. And so the fourth thing, and this is what's most important, is that it was dangerous to sail the Mediterranean in the winter. It was dangerous then, and it is dangerous to this day. The dangerous season is from about mid-September to mid-November, and after that, no one sailed until the spring, which is why they were trying to get to a certain port, because that was a much better place to spend the winter. So verse 9 says that they were sailing after the fast. That means the Day of Atonement, which is in Hebrew Yom Kippur, which is a day of fasting and sacrifice on the Hebrew calendar for the purpose of atoning for sins. This usually happens late September, early October. So it's in this time period that they're getting closer to November, so it's getting worse out there. So they get a boat, if I can see the map, they get a boat of Adramyttium. Now, I remember when I first read this years ago, I thought that must have been what the ship was made of. But it's not. Adramyttium was actually a place. If you see Pergamum right here, it's hard to see on this map, but there's this little kind of enclave right here. Right there is where Adramyttium is. So this is a ship from there that's sailing all around this Mediterranean basin, so for the purpose of, this is what they do as a career. So they pick up this ship here in Caesarea, they make a stop at Sidon to pick up more people, and then they make it around because the winds are pretty bad. They're kind of hugging this area of Asia Minor, thinking that it's going to help them, and they make it to this port called Lyra. At that point, they change ships in verses 5 and 6, and the centurion says, hey, we found this grain ship, this Alexandrian grain ship that's going to Rome, which is over here. Now, this is pretty common. And forgive me for kind of nerding out, but just to give you some background. Alexandria is here in Egypt. This is the port city in Egypt. And there was an agreement between Rome and Egypt to provide most of the grain in the city of Rome was from Egypt. And so they came from Alexandria to this port, and their goal is to make it all the way to Rome. They pick up Paul and all these guys, and they only get as far as Sidus, which doesn't look that far in their journey, but it's about 130 miles, and it's really bad. And so then, instead of sailing across, they're like, it's terrible, we got to kind of, they use this island of Crete. They get to Salmon, they make it to Lessia, which is next to Fair Haven, and that's where Paul makes his warning, because their hope is to get to Phoenix and spend the winter there, because if you're going to spend the winter anywhere, why not spend it in Phoenix? And our Phoenix, their Phoenix, everybody's Phoenix is nice. And so anyway, so Paul makes this warning, saying, listen, this is not going to end well. Not only is the ship going to be lost, but lives are going to be lost too. And some people might think, and this is what happens, that the centurion says, I'm going to go with the helmsman, and I'm going to go with the owner of the ship over Paul. Why is Paul an expert? Now listen, first of all, this was totally common knowledge. Everyone knew not to sail during this time and how dangerous it was. But the other thing is that in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, Paul says, 3 times I was shipwrecked and spent a day and night in the open sea. He also spent more than, between his 3 missionary journeys, traveled more than 11,000 miles in this area of the Mediterranean. I mean, he knew it well. So he's got practical experience. But listen, here's the thing that I think as we kind of bring it closer to us. Sometimes storms come into our lives because life brings storms. That's just how it works. The other times, we bring storms on ourselves because we don't listen to the warnings. And so someone is telling us, hey, this is a bad decision. You don't want to go this route. And we just don't listen because we just don't believe the person that's telling us. But if we had, we would have been able to avoid. We can't avoid all the storms, but we can certainly avoid the ones that we bring upon ourselves. Now, if you've been around Calvary for a while, you know I love telling stories. And when my kids were younger, I loved telling stories to mess with them. And I would just sometimes make up stories. And that's why my wife would say, kids only believe 50% of what your dad says. And I would say, yeah, but which 50%? There's no way to know. So you may as well believe it all. So anyway, one morning I wake up. It's probably like 5 years ago. I wake up and I go into my office at home. And I had this, my old house had this bay window that you could see in the backyard. And so I pull up the screen and there's a hawk in my yard. I've never seen a hawk up that close. But I'm looking at this thing, and there's a hawk, and it's molting. So there's like feathers all around it. And it's just amazing. So I decide to do more investigation. So I go into the backyard, and it flew away. That's the end of the story, right? That's not interesting at all. So I get home from church, and I hadn't seen the kids yet because I left early. And I said, guys, there was a situation this morning. There was a hawk in our backyard. And when I went to the back to investigate, there was an altercation. The hawk attacked me, and we fought to the death. And I am a skilled warrior with the swiftness of a cheetah, and so I ended him. And the kids were like, wow, really? And then they like all kind of huddled together, and they're like, yeah, okay. We don't believe you. And I'm like, okay, you don't believe me? Then come with me. We go to the backyard, and I'm like, look at these pile of feathers. This is where the hawk was. This is where it began. This is where the battle of wills took place. And that's why that hawk saw me and tried to gouge out my eye. And I grabbed its claw and I just body slammed him. And you know what? I saved our family. I saved your life. You didn't even know it. And anyway, so I show them. They look around like, oh, yeah, that's pretty interesting. And then they're like, okay, let's. Then they kind of like, they do like this little conference like, what do you think? And well, I mean, the feathers are there. And I mean, some of this kind of makes sense. And so then there's, okay. We still don't believe you. And I'm like, what more evidence do you need? I basically saved your life. It's incredible that you don't believe me based on the evidence. And they're like, okay, well, that is a good point. It's okay. All right. If you killed the hawk, where's the body? Well, you got me. And but the problem is because I mess around so much, sometimes I tell my kids things that are true, and they don't believe me. And so one time when Livy was younger, I was telling the story at dinner one night about when I used to run a college. Livy says to me, she's like, oh, no. You're not going to get us with that trick. Mom told us about your grades when you were in high school, mister. And I'm like, first of all, when did I become mister? And then Carrie leans over and says, honey, actually, that's true. You ran a college for 5 years. And she's like, oh, well, wow, good for you, Dad. That's great. Now, listen, we're going to have a certain amount of storms in life. But listen, you don't want to invite the bonus storms in. And sometimes we do that because we just don't listen to the counsel that we're given. And it's like, well, I don't believe you, or I don't think you're telling me the truth, or I think those rules apply to everybody else but me. And whatever that is, listen, if we want to avoid the extra storms, we've got to be teachable. We got to ask questions. We got to be curious. We got to get good counsel. All of that, humility is required for all of it. This is why Proverbs 12:1, here's what it says. It's a verse that we should all commit to memory. Whoever loves instruction loves knowledge. But whoever hates correction is stupid. I remember a few years ago, I told a guy, I quoted that verse to a guy. He got so mad. He's like, I can't believe you're calling me stupid. And I'm like, I'm not calling you stupid. I'm like, the Bible's calling you stupid. That's totally different. And listen, sometimes the storm we find ourselves in is completely of our own doing. And then we're like, God, do you love me? And do you know what's going on? And listen, what we've got to do in that moment is own it. if we put ourselves in the situation, own it, because that's the only way you're getting out of it. And saying, I'm going to trust God to get me through this one, and then I'm going to listen to wisdom on the front end so I can avoid some of these extra ones. Well, these guys are in it. Look at what happens now in verse 12. It says this. Remember, they've gone all the way down to Crete. We'll look at the map in a second. So when the south wind blew softly, this means there was violent winds, then things start calming down, and they think, it's okay for us to go. Supposing that they had obtained their desire, putting out to sea, they sailed close by Crete. Not long after, a tempestuous headwind arose called Euroclydon. And when the ship was caught and could not head into the wind, we let her drive, or let her be driven. And running under the shelter of an island called Clauda, we secured the skiff with difficulty. And when they had taken it on board, they used cables to undergird the ship. That is, they ran ropes and whatnot under the ship to tighten it. Remember, these ships were made of wood, so even if it kind of gets roughed up, the ropes are going to keep it together. And fearing lest they should run aground on the Syrtis sands, they struck sail and were so driven. And because we were exceedingly tempest-tossed, the next day they lightened the ship. On the third day, we threw the ship's tackle overboard with our own hands. Now, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest beat on us, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up. But after long abstinence from food, then Paul stood in the midst of them and said, Men, you should have listened to me, and have not sailed from Crete and incurred such disaster and loss. And now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For there stood by me this night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve, saying, Do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar. And indeed, God has granted you all those who sail with you. Therefore, take heart, men, for I believe that God will, that it will be just as it was told to me. However, we must run aground on a certain island. If you pause there and give me your attention. The first thing that we said, how do I avoid a shipwreck? By heeding the warnings. The second thing that we need to do is take heart. Take heart. Be courageous. I want you to know, a couple things I want you to note that are important. And that is, in the ancient world, there were no compasses. There was no sonar. They navigated by the stars. So when they say that days have gone by where they haven't seen the stars, they have no idea where they're going. Then this tempestuous headwind arises called Euroclydon that we saw, and they said, we just had to let it drive or let the ship be driven wherever the wind was taking them. There's no motor on this ship. This is sails and rowing. And so they couldn't fight the wind, so they just have to let it go. The ship is totally out of control. They have no control over where they're going. They can't tell where they're being taken because it's overcast, and celestial navigation is how they travel. And this is why, listen, these are people that have spent their entire lives at sea, and this is what they say. They have lost all hope that they're going to be saved. Because this kind of weather is when ships are either torn apart or sink. And so then Paul speaks up, and this is the thing that I just love about Paul, because leaders are leaders no matter the circumstance. Paul boards the ship as a prisoner, and by the end of it, he's telling everybody what needs to happen for them to survive this. But Paul, even though a prisoner, he is the spiritual leader, speaks up and starts encouraging the crew and speaking life into them. And he tells them, here's what you got to do. You need to take heart. That is, be encouraged, because an angel of God spoke to me. These are not just platitudes, like, you go, girl, you got this. That's, first of all, what is that? But the second thing is, he's telling them, this is real. You want to do well, you got to trust God, that they're going to have to get to an island, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, and they're going to have to run the ship aground, which could destroy the ship, but everyone is going to be saved. These are the moments when you have to decide if your faith is genuine. Saying that you trust God is great. However, trusting God by doing what he's saying in the face of everything that you're seeing, that's what trusting God is really about. And these are the moments that prove your faith, because you're saying, listen, I'm doing what he says. I'm not just saying it. I'm actually taking my own medicine and doing it. A few weeks ago, I was in Orlando with my family, and I think I told you one of the stories about this, but I didn't tell you this one, but I'd get up in the morning and get like coffee or breakfast for my family. And so we had stayed at this house, and the second day that we were there, I go out in the morning to get coffee, and I saw that there's a Krispy Kreme donuts like 1 or 2 blocks from where we're staying. And the morning that I went out, I saw the Krispy Kreme, and the sign was on. And I knew that the Lord was speaking to me. And so, now, if you don't know, maybe you just got here from Cuba. Let me just tell you what that means, the sign. When the sign is on at Krispy Kreme, that means that hot, just off the press, glazed donuts are being made right now. So I went in, and I drove in, and then I got out of the car, and I went in, and I bought a dozen donuts. Fine, I bought 2. Don't judge me. It's not even part of the story, but anyways. Anyway, so over the course of the 5 or 6 days that I was there, I stopped in a couple more times. How many? Who knows? It's impossible to know these things. All I'll say is that the last day I was there, I saw the lady behind the counter. She said, "Hey, Bob, the usual." So whatever that means is what it means. So anyway, but I walked in on the Friday before we left, and I get, the sign is on, and all of the donuts are green. And all of them. The donuts are green, the glaze is green, because it's St. Patrick's Day that weekend, and they were doing all these green donuts. And I'm like, "Hey, do you have any non-green ones? Like just ones that don't look like they were made with broccoli." And she's like, no, they're all green this weekend. And I'm just like, what in the world is good that is green? And so I'm like, every food that is green is pretty much disgusting, right? And so pretty much all vegetables. And she's like, no, it's, and I'm like, yeah, but this is really, I don't know if my kids are going to eat this. This is really not appetizing, like a green donut with green glaze, and the inside is totally green. And I'm like, I don't even know how they're going to taste. And she's like, don't worry. She kind of laughs, and she's like, yeah, I know people said that, but don't worry, they taste the same. And when she smiled at me, the entire inside of her mouth was green. And I was like, I can trust this woman. And because she ain't saying it, she's eating the inventory. And she was right. I ate 6 just to be sure. But she wasn't just talking a good game. And this, I'm telling you, this is what people are looking for from Christians. It's easy to trust God when things are great. But they want to know, do we really believe this when things aren't going well? That our trust isn't just talk. I mean, are we really ready to press in when everything around us looks different? We're saying, hey, I'm trusting God besides everything that I see and everything that I feel. I'm still leaning into Him. And listen, and here's what happens. They have to make a decision. They have to start throwing everything overboard. When it says that they threw the tackle overboard, that's not like all the stuff they use for fishing. The tackle, that literally means like their bedding, everything that they were cooking with, everything that was just like not bolted down, they were throwing out. And in a minute we're going to read. And they end up having to throw out even all of the grain, the thing that they were shipping, they had to throw out, because it's in those moments that you got to ask yourself, what do I trust in and what's most important? Look what happens in verse 27. It says this, now when the 14th night had come. Think about that. They've been at this, being tossed to and fro for 2 weeks. As we were driven up and down the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors sensed that they were drawing near some land. They took some soundings and found it to be 20 fathoms. They had gone a little further, and they found the soundings again to be 15 fathoms. Then, fearing lest we should run aground on the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. As the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, when they had let down the skiff into the sea under pretense of putting the anchors from the prow is the front part of the ship, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the skiff and let it fall off. Now, if you pause there, listen, I want you to see what happens when people are trying to escape. A skiff is a small boat. So a large ship like this would have a skiff. I think today we call them dinghies. I think that's the technical term. And so what they'll do is large ships like that would either be in port or at sea. But if you had to go to a shore or go to another boat, you would take one of these smaller boats, a skiff, and take it to shore or take it to another boat for supplies or whatever. So there's some guys that are like, hey, we're going to secure this skiff. And their plan was, we're getting off this boat. We're getting out of here because this thing is going down. And Paul says, hey, listen, if they don't stay on the boat, nobody's going to be saved. And then the soldiers, they just cut the ropes. And they're like, we're getting rid of this. We're in this. This is the kind of trust that we're talking about, the kind of trust that God is seeking from us. Whatever promise God's made to you, whatever plan God has for you, whatever solution to the difficulty you're facing, everything you're looking for is found by staying inside the boat. That's why Hebrews 2 calls Jesus the captain of our salvation. And it's how we reveal our trust, by our actions. If you want to live a blessed life, the greatest skill that you can learn is trusting God, because the storm is revealing what we value most. Everybody cared about the tackle until it was like the tackle or your life. In a minute, they're going to have to throw even over the grain. But when the difference is the grain or your life, the grain isn't all that important. And let me tell you something. This is, if you want to minimize conflict in your life, if you will stay focused on what matters most, I'm telling you, it is going to give you a straighter line to where it is that you want to go. I can tell you this, so often in marriage, we get so fixated on winning the argument, as if the argument, that's the most important thing. No, the most important thing is winning the relationship, because a healthy relationship avoids a lot of storms. I can't even tell you how many friendships have ended over people who just can't let things go. Because they can't focus on what matters most. And I've talked to people like, is this the hill you're going to die on? Well, no. Well, then why are you fighting like it is? And you're fighting like it's life or death for something that doesn't really matter all that much. And I'm telling you this is just, we are addicted to being right. And this is the thing that I see. And listen, if you want to be much happier, if you don't want to be happy, keep doing what you're doing. But if you want to be much happier, learn to let go of things that don't really matter all that much. It's either that, or jump off the boat and try to fend for yourself in an ocean of uncertainty. But the wisest among us are staying on the boat with Captain Jesus. All right? And by the way, it's the first time I've ever called him Captain Jesus. I'm not really sure how I feel about that. I'm just going to see how it feels. I'm going to feel it out a little bit. All right. Now look what happens in verse 33. And as day was about to dawn, Paul implored them all to take food, saying, "Today is the 14th day you have waited and continued without food and eaten nothing. Therefore I urge you to take nourishment, for this is for your survival, since not a hair will fall from the head of any of you." And when he had said these things, he took bread, gave thanks to God in the presence of them all, and when he had broken it, he began to eat. And when all were encouraged, they also took food for themselves. And in all, we were 276 persons on the ship. So when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and threw the wheat into the sea. And when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they obtained a bay with a beach, onto which they planned to run the ship if possible. And they let the anchors and let them down in the sea. Meanwhile, loosing the rudder ropes, and they hoisted the mainsail to the wind and made for the shore. But striking a place where the two seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the prow, the front of the ship, struck fast and remained immovable. So it hits and gets stuck. But the stern, the back of the ship, was broken up by the violence of the waves. So just get an idea. They run the ship aground, the front hits, it's stuck. Now the back is being destroyed by the winds. And the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim and escape. That was a common Roman thing. If you were in charge of a prisoner and he escaped, the soldier got the prisoner's sentence. And so their idea is, we're going to kill the prisoners so that when anything happens with Rome, like, hey, we were in a shipwreck, people died. All the prisoners, we're good, but all the prisoners died. Anyway, so that's their idea. But the centurion, wanting to save Paul, kept them from their purpose and commanded that those who could swim jump overboard first and get to land, and the rest, some on boards. And by the way, if some of these guys were on boards and stood up, that is the invention of surfing. I can't prove it, but this could be the invention of surfing right here in the Bible. First time you're hearing it. All right, and then some on parts of the ship. And so it was that they all escaped safely to land. All right. Last thing, and then we're going to bring this to a conclusion. Last thing, heed the warnings, take heart, and lastly, see the result. I want you to notice that Paul is now the leader. Paul's the leader of the group, and he tells everyone to eat. I want you to eat. And even in the midst of this storm, he takes time to pray and give thanks, and it's a sign of someone who's trusting God in the middle of the storm. And I want you to notice as he prays in the presence of everyone. And sometimes people ask me, like, when we go out to eat, should we pray? I'm like, of course you should pray. You should pray. You gotta pray for them too as you're there. And it's good for people to see you praying. I was, this week, I was in Barnes & Noble. And so what happened is that I collect records, and I know some of you don't know what that is. Let me explain what that means. That there was a time in the world when music was put on records. They're about this big. And then now the dark times, everything went digital. But there's this thing that when men turn 40, they start getting very interested in vinyl. And me being a man of a certain age, I got very interested in vinyl, and I started buying all my favorite records, and because I'm a musician, and I got to have a hobby. So anyway, I had been looking for this record for a while, and the Barnes & Noble out kind of east in Pines had it. And I just made it a mental note that next time I'm in the area, I'm going to swing by and pick up the records. So this week, Carrie has an appointment, and then the kids have got something. So I grabbed the kids, and then Carrie and we all meet at the Longhorn in Pines for lunch, which is in the plaza where the Barnes & Noble is. And so Xander says, hey, we can get the record. I'm like, yeah, after lunch, we'll go get the record. So after we eat, and then the girls kind of go their way, and then Xander and I, we go to Barnes & Noble to grab the record. We go in, we get it, we get in line. We're in line at the register, and there's a lady in front of us talking to the girl behind the counter. And she says, I just want you to know this is the Bible that I brought in. I'm trying to find a case that fits it. And so as I'm listening, I'm realizing this woman is about to make a bad decision in the Bible case that she's going to buy. And because I have this thing in my life where I just can't help myself. And I have to get involved in things that have no concern for me. So I just get involved. And I'm like, hey, can I help you? And I think she's under the impression that I work there. And which I do things like that. Like, man, I used to love wearing a red shirt to Target. Boy, did I have fun. Now you don't even need to wear a red shirt. You just got to talk with confidence. You need some help? I'm actually looking for this bulb. I got you. It's down this way. Anyway, so this is how I entertain myself while my wife is picking up items on our actual list. So anyway, so I say, can I help you? And she says yes. And I explained to her that there is a science to a Bible case. I said, you can't have one that's too snug, because if it's too snug, every time you open it, it's going to start yanking on the leather, and it's going to start separating to the actual Bible pages themselves. I said, or if you get one that's too big, when you unzip it, the Bible's going to fall out because it doesn't have enough to hang on. So the one that she has there, I'm like, listen, this one doesn't fit, it's too small. So she goes back. She gets two more, and then she finds one. She has a couple, and I'm like, let me just do this. Give me the Bible. I get the Bible. I undo everything. The lady that works there is just watching this whole thing go down. I'm like, look, this is the one you need. It fits perfect. I'm explaining how this goes, and she's like, wow. She's like, I want you to know you're not here by accident. And I said, no, and it's not every day that a pastor that you don't know is helping you find the perfect Bible case. And so we talked for a minute. She's like totally blown away that I'm a pastor. And then she pays for it, because we had forgotten about that. And she pays for it, and she says, okay, now you have to bless it. And I've never blessed a Bible case before. But I'm flexible. So I'm like, yeah, let's roll. So I said, okay. I said, but here's the thing. I got a meeting in 20 minutes. I said, so we got to do it right here, right now. And then the lady behind the counter, her name is Adrian. We're good friends now. And so I say, Adrian, is it cool if I pray with this woman right here? And she's like, yeah, of course. Do what you need to. And she starts walking away. And I'm like, no, Adrian. Adrian. Come closer. We're praying together. This is the three of us. My son was there too. I'm like, this is the four of us. We're all doing this. And so anyway, I pray for the Bible. That Bible case has never fallen apart. That thing has been so prayed for. And I pray for the lady. I pray for Adrian. I pray for Barnes & Noble. That place ain't going out of business. Adrian's going to be able to work there as long as she wants. And so then I pray with them. And then, afterwards, I introduced her to my son. She's like, this is my son, Alexander. She's like, wow, so handsome. I'm like, you didn't say anything about me, by the way. And but I'm going to let that go. And so then she leaves. She's so happy. And then I'm like, oh, here are these two 90s pop punk albums that I want. And then, Adrian was happy. And then I left, and I was happy. And here's the thing that's just so amazing. If you want your faith to shine wherever you go, we've got to make a decision to do what's right, even in the middle of the storm. Because storms come and go. Jesus taught that. Jesus taught us that storms come to everyone. And it's only our issue of preparedness that reveals what the storm is going to do. The greatest sermon ever given, as far as I'm concerned, is the Sermon on the Mount, found in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And in this, as Jesus gets to the end of the sermon, he ends talking about a storm. And I'm going to end my sermon talking about this storm. So look what happens in Matthew 7. It says, "Therefore he who hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on a rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came, the winds blew and beat on that house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. But whoever hears these sayings of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rains came, the rain descended, the floods came, the winds blew and beat on that house, and it fell, and great was its fall." Storms are coming to everyone. The question is, what are you building on as the foundation of your life? You see, here's the thing that people miss, and if you miss this, you're going to miss the point of the Sermon on the Mount. If you and I were looking at the two houses that Jesus is talking about, they look exactly the same. All the houses look great. The only thing that's different, and we can't even see it, you'd never know anything was different because they look the same, and that's the heart of Jesus' sermon. But when the storms of life come, the rain, the wind, the floods beat on the house, one crumbles and the other stands. Why? Because of the foundation. What does that mean? Listen, this is so huge. If we don't get this, we'll never understand the sermon. The foundation is, I don't obey God to be loved by God. I am loved by God, that's why I obey him. And these are two wildly different ideas. If you and I build our house on the good things that we do for God, on the record that we produce, where we are following to the letter of the law, and because of that, because of all that we've done, God now somehow owes us. And when we live like that, there will be a storm that comes into our lives that we don't think we deserve, and it will blow everything away and leave us with nothing because our faith was built on us. That is the saddest person in the world, who's seeking to do good things, but ultimately they were worshiping what they did for God, not God himself. But instead, juxtaposed to that, when you understand that you are more loved by God than you could possibly imagine, that he provided forgiveness for you and I long before we were trying to do what was right. When we realize that, our only response is to love and serve the God who has done so much for us. And when the storms come, and they will, you and I can have a faith that is unshakable because it's not built on God owing us. It's built on God's love for us. And so when difficult circumstances come, we can still have joy, because it's not built on somehow God owing us anything. Instead, it's built on Jesus' great love for us. Let's pray together. And Lord, we're grateful for that we can build our lives on the reality of your love, that you loved first and gave us the model of how to love, how to live. So help us to lay a foundation for our lives that no matter the storm, we would have a faith that is unshakable as we're trusting with you, walking with you, and looking to you. And we pray it in Jesus' name, and everybody said, amen. Amen.
Thank you for joining us today. If you made a decision to follow Jesus and begin a relationship with him, congratulations. It's the best decision you're ever going to make. You may be wondering, so what happens now? Where do I go from here? Just text BEGIN to 62488, and we'll be able to send you this free gift. It's a book called Begin, written by Pastor Bob, and it's going to help you take those first steps on your new journey of faith. So remember, to stay up to date with everything happening at Calvary, follow @MyCalvary on Instagram and Facebook. Until next week, we love you, we're praying for you. God bless you.